Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and once again, welcome to the 2023 Selma Odom Lectures, which was established in 2010 to honor the contributions of scholar, writer, researcher, and educator, and York University Professor Emerita Selma Odom. A leading light in the field of Canadian dance studies, Dr. Odom was with York's Department of Dance for close to 4 decades. Since her retirement from York, Dr. Odom has continued to pursue research and writing projects in many exciting fields. This year marks the 12th Selma Odom Lectures, and our session today is titled Validating Acts of Dancing and Scholarship. The co-hosts for today's event are the York University Department of Dance, as well as Dance Collection Danse, and thank you to all parties who have made today's session possible. I'd like to begin by introducing our 3 panelists. On my left, Paromita Kar, who graduated with a PhD in 2014, is co-artistic director of Ensemble Topaz, a Toronto-based dance ensemble dedicated to dances from Central Asia and South Asia, and is also the executive director of the Community Folk Art Council of Toronto. Welcome, Paromita. Thank you. Next to Paromita is Priya A. Thompson, a PhD graduate in dance from 2016. Priya is a dance and theater historian, multidisciplinary artist, and assistant professor in the Department of Dramatic Arts, now at Brock University. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Jonathan Osborn, PhD 2019, is a Toronto-based interdisciplinary researcher, educator, and choreographer, currently serving as an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Dance at York. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. So the first of our 3 questions. How does the research you pursued as part of your dissertation inform your current research and practice? Paromita, can I ask you to start?
So hi, I finished my PhD in 2014. And the way I look at the whole dissertation and the PhD, I look at it as a journey. And I think because I did diversify after I received this degree, I did diversify into other areas within dance. So when I was doing my dissertation was based on a stylistic lineage of Odissi, which is one of the 8 classical Indian dance forms. It was also the dance form that I had trained in for a long time since childhood. And that was it's what I had grown up with. It formed a big part of my identity. I was one of the first students to enter the PhD program. And I was 24 years old when I entered the program. So at that point in life, that was all I knew in the world of dance was classical Indian dance. So when I finished the degree, I also had at that point spent 6-7 years in Toronto. And as a result of a natural process of being in Toronto, being in the artistic, the cultural ecology of Toronto, I was introduced to several artists coming from many different disciplines within dance, and specifically within world dances, if we can call it that. So within the world of non-ballet, non-contemporary, non-Euro North American dances. And I found myself getting a lot of work within other areas of dance that were outside of classical Indian dance. So, for example, I did do a series of performances with Ida Meftahi and her teacher she had brought in from Iran in Iranian dance. This was happening while I was doing the PhD. I kept getting recruited to perform in Afghan music videos that were being produced outside of Afghanistan. And so I was getting all this work that were in areas and art forms which I think could be considered somewhat aesthetically adjacent to classical Indian dance, but not quite situated within the realm of classical Indian dance. And this opened up my curiosity. And so I found once I finished the dissertation, yes, I am still a classical Indian dancer, but I really went into practice the first few years after my dissertation and after receiving the PhD degree. I went into practice and I went into really looking a lot into the Central Asian dance aesthetic and where the overlap, the aesthetic overlap was between Central Asian dances and South Asian dances. And for the first 5-6 years, I actually was completely committed to practice. I did not enter academia right away after receiving the degree and after graduating. I stayed within the world of practice, but it kept, I guess my curiosities were still very scholarly, even though I wasn't situated in academia. My curiosities were very research-based, and a lot of the research skills I acquired here, they came in very handy. So I remember when I was actually here at York, I was in Selma's class for research methods. And that year, one of the methods we had looked at in our overarching theme for research methods was memory. And this was my take, one of the takeaways I had was these overarching themes. And I just remember being fascinated by that because as a practitioner and as a researcher into this world of Afghan dance, I really had to work a lot with memory because Afghanistan currently dance in public by female practitioners is banned. So there is no current publicly existing dance practiced in Afghanistan. There is an underground scene, there is a scene where it's domestically practiced, and yet I kept getting invited to several performance opportunities in the Afghan Canadian community. So I was, where do I find this source material from, when there's very little for me to reference in the current day, whatever is available to me. So I kind of embarked upon, I guess, I kind of engaged with one of the research practices that we'd spoken about in Selma's class, which is memory. And I did interviews and people were very forthcoming about memories of Afghan dance in villages and pre-1980s, memories of watching dancing in villages or even their grandmothers, and even the idea of the collective imagination of what Afghan dance could look like. So that was something that really, that idea of drawing upon memory as the site for sourcing movement material was something that very much came out of this program and the experiences of this program. So I guess that's one of the ways. And there were other adjacent disciplines within Central Asian dance as well that I used similar research methodology. Yeah, so for me, my dissertational topic was very much within the dissertation. I mean, I kept, yes, I am still a practitioner of classical Indian dance, but I think it's almost inevitable that within Toronto and within Ontario's cultural ecology that one will be inspired and exposed and open up this curiosity about other art forms and movement forms. And I think that's the natural pathway that my journey took. And I guess something else that came up in my life post-dissertation was actually something that came up during the pandemic, which was I was hired as the executive director for Community Folk Art Council of Toronto, of which Dr. Mary Jane Warner is the chair of the board of directors. In that capacity, again, a lot of the research methodology, ways of writing has come in very handy in terms of writing grants and writing other, I guess, just framing the work of the organization. But yeah, I mean, it has been, I would not be able to do any of those without having gone through this process, through this journey here at York in the dance department.
Thank you, Paromita. Priya, how does the research you pursued as part of your dissertation inform the work you do now?
Well, I think for me, I'd like to open by saying I'm very grateful for York having existed, a dance program dedicated to a PhD. the idea of being able to understand how I learned things via pattern recognition that was so sort of informed by my early dance training was invaluable and continues to be invaluable in terms of interdisciplinary avenues of understanding myself, my art practice, but also theoretical subjects. So for my own dissertation, I was interested, as I always have been, in constructions of a human, but difference writ large. So specifically with my dissertation, that took the shape of looking at different performances of the non-human in transatlantic context of what we call the long 19th century, so between 1794 and 1913 thereabouts, very broad. But what that gave me the opportunity to do, and I appreciate the fact that York allowed me to be as broad in my scope, which is, I think, quite unusual, that ability to be highly creative in one's research was invaluable. Anyway, so that scope allowed me to come up with a few threads, like a few findings that I continue to draw from. And it's interesting that Paromita mentions Selma Odom's class, which I think I took a summer course. And Selma also spoke about memory. And since that time, memory studies has really been maybe not a focal point, but it appears repeatedly in the things that I'm interested in investigating. And specifically with regard to the dissertation, the way in which those threads have now informed my current work or my current research interests is that my fundamental premise going into the dissertation was that movement informs the construction of what it means to be normatively human. Whereas in previous studies, it occurred to me that the focus was largely ocular. My interest was looking at choreography specifically as a kind of axis for constructions of what it meant to be human and what it meant to be different. And by that kind of investigation, I ran across this sort of theme of mobility and mobs, and what it meant to move in groups, and what it meant to migrate, and what it meant to cross boundaries and borders, and what transgression meant. And by that, and then applying the frameworks of like mnemonics to me, so I started to think about what that could mean in terms of my own personal life experience. So the current project I'm working on now, which is a Canada Council funded project, is really around my own early memories of dancing at Ile Sainte-Hélène, for anyone who's from Montreal, as part of La Ronde, which was Expo 67's sunset years. Turned out to be a very long period of time. The sunset years ran right. But anyway, yeah, so I was in a dance performance early on when I was about 5 years old. And it was a very curious performance for me. I think it was for me a riveting moment in which it shaped the arc of my life in ways that I just kept coming back to, but never quite had the opportunity to write about or think about. And so that experience was that I was all dressed up in my costuming. I was trained as a classical Bharatanatyam dancer. So there I was, and as usual, the waiting is an enormous part of dancing, for me anyway, the costuming, the waiting. And in that waiting period, I wandered out to the parking lot of the theater. We were scheduled to be in the India Pavilion, as it was named, within the theater, but I heard this noise outside, and so I wandered out onto the parking lot, and there in the like July sun heat blazing down was this band, like 5 young South Asian boys between the ages of 6 and 12, and they were dressed sort of like Boney M or the Jackson 5, like in like lycra, red lycra unitards with rhinestones all over them, and there was almost nobody in the parking lot. But then the mic squealed, and the lead singer, just crashed into this cover version of Rhinestone Cowboy by Glenn Campbell, and they were playing country western tunes. And this to me, like, first of all, I was riveted because it was amazing. The performance was exceptional, but I started to wonder, like, I knew that I was in costume, representing what it meant to be Indian in the India Pavilion. And kitty corner from there was the Indian Pavilion. So you can see the slippery semantics around India and Indian in 1980s Quebec cultural politics being played out there, confusing enough. But then I was watching this, young South Asian boy singing Rhinestone Cowboy dressed as a cowboy. So something about that stayed with me, and I remember thinking, I would like to be in that person's shoes. And since that moment, I've always wondered who that Rhinestone Cowboy was, what they were doing, because it was a highly unusual performance. It was clearly ahead of its time, right? And it's funny because it's absurd, but it's also very real. These are very real people living in Quebec, branching out, trying things, experimenting, working across disciplines. And my project now is to work with this. On the one hand, I'm creating kind of a fictocritical narrative. So it means on the one hand, I'm hoping to find out who the Rhinestone Cowboy in fact was, but if I do not, it will become a fictional narrative that builds on my memory of that experience and what that means. Sort of examining the topology of the mytho-historical creature, the character, the cowboy versus the Indian, and what that meant in Quebec in the 1980s, but also it looks like it might turn into a very strange musical as well. That's what I'll say for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I did my defense for my dissertation, after I came out, Bridget, she's on my committee, and she looked at me and she's like, "You still don't know what you wrote, did you?" And I thought this was a really interesting comment. And I wasn't really offended or anything because I wanted to figure out what she meant. And because my dissertation was about like a lot of different things. It was kind of about the zoo, but it more used the zoo as a kind of springboard to think about people staging and choreographing animals, the way the animals affect us, the way we design spaces for other like living things, the way they live in those spaces or don't live well in those spaces, the way animals, the way we can think about a space in a certain way, the way academia thinks about certain things that in ways that I'm not always comfortable with. And so, as you can see, like there's lots of things there. So obviously some of them are going to be affecting me. But one of the things that I haven't been writing about is the zoo. Like really at all. Like it was really interesting because like the moment that I finished, I was like, okay, I think I'm okay with this. But what I am doing, and I want to actually echo before I go on, I want to echo Priya's comment about the kind of freedom I was given here and the mentorship. Well, Selma has always been a kind of role model of mine. When I did my master's degree here, I was so overwhelmed by her ability to accept different people's ideas of what dance could be. And this really changed the way that I wanted to be in the world and be with other people. And it's something that I still bring forward with my students because I don't want them to have to be me ever, you know. But I also had Bridget, who was great to me, and she's always kind of, I feel like she's like kind of laughing sometimes in a good way. And I had the one quote of like Barbara Sellers Young, who drew out all these things in me that maybe I had like secret shame about like not my art career, maybe not going the way I wanted to. And she really made me reinvest in this and take pride in the knowledge that I had gained as a dancer. So one of the things that is still with me is like a pride in the time that and the knowledge that I have as a dancer and the way that it shapes you and allows you to see the world in ways that other people can't. And I think it's super important. I don't want to knock dance studies too hard, but I feel like sometimes it takes this political lens that I'm not always comfortable with. And I think it sometimes forgets about this idea that like the world is different for each person. And there's not one way to like see or interpret it or move, I think. So I think an open-mindedness is what I've taken forward. I guess on a minor key, I developed a kind of research methodology about kind of experiential, like I guess you would call it somatically engaging with subjects. And I still use this in all the works that I've made since my dissertation.
Thank you.
Do you want to start actually then with the next
Yeah, I
round?
might as well, but it kind of.
Okay, yeah.
I was trying to bracket off
Yeah,
what my problems were.
so. Question number 2, what obstacles or challenges did you encounter during your doctoral research and how did you navigate them?
Okay, there's two. One of the problems was me, and one of the problems was other people. The first problem was my own idea about what I should be doing. So I came to the PhD, kind of my art career, it wasn't really where I wanted it to be, so I thought, okay, let's do this. Let's become a scholar, let's go for it, got the brain for it, you can do it, John. And I did it, and then I was studying all the dance research, and I was like, I don't like this that much. And it wasn't that I didn't like the idea of there being dance research, I just didn't like the kind of politics that were, like, there's a lot of politics of care, you know, agency and authority, these themes that I wasn't that interested in, but I felt really like, do I have to do these? Is this what it means to be a dance scholar right now? Is this where I have to go? And so I kind of like moved sideways, and then I was like, okay, no, I'll like take classes in other subjects. And I did a lot of anthropology, I did a ton of communication studies, and I did a lot of continental philosophy. And I was super excited about these things. Super excited about these things. And then, so I developed a research project, and it was like about digital kind of virtual motion bank. Is a thing called the motion bank. It's a kind of repository of choreographies that have been digitalized in Europe. And I wanted to study here. And then I was talking to another person that was kind of on my committee. Her name's Janine Marchessault, and she was talking to me about what I was doing, and she looked skeptical. And then she looked at this art project that I was working on about the zoo, and she was like, why don't you do this? She's like, this is what you need to do. This is cool. And I said, I don't know, it's an art project. I don't know. And she encouraged me to do this. And after I accepted that my art can inflect my scholarship, things got a lot better in terms of the way that I could work, because I wasn't trying to like be something that I was allowing the knowledge that I had accrued over my life to bear upon the thing that I was writing about. And so the things that I was writing about became more interesting. And I thought that I could also intervene in places within the academy where the body was talked about as a kind of thing, but wasn't referenced as a thing that's actually with us all the time, no matter what. My other issue was like other people, meaning other people's idea of what dance studies or dance should be. And this I got from going, not from York really, but I got it from going to different conferences in Europe and in the States. And people, I tell them about my research, and they'd say, that's not dance studies. And I'd say, cool, whatever, that's fine. And so it wasn't really a problem like on the outside, but inside I was kind of upset about this because I was like working hard and trying to really make connections. And some of the connections weren't in fashion right now. I was looking at a lot of like dance and animal work. And sometimes there's currents within, I don't know, have you found this sometimes?
Yeah, and there are many borders.
Yeah. I was running this thing, we're like, I can't believe you're writing about animals. Animals don't dance. I was like, I didn't say they did. I was looking at right? And so I got really kind of scared about where am I going to be in the future? What's my future going to look like? And then I just thought, screw it, let's just see what happens. And so once I kind of made that decision to just not kind of care, then things got better. And I had, as I said, I had really nice people supporting me that saw value in what I was doing. And this, you know, there's another, obviously there's teachers out there, like your words matter to people. Like they really do.
Thank you. Priya, obstacles, challenges.
You know, I remember my time at York being truly joyful, one of the happiest periods of my life. So I can't stress that enough. It's very strange. It's not what I anticipated, but I mean, everyone had spoken to me about what a PhD would be, and it was all of those things. It was tiring, it was grueling, it was meticulous, it was work I was unfamiliar with in the sense of what it required of me. I developed skills by that process, but yeah, it was challenging, but nonetheless, I found that really throwing myself into it gave me a joy I didn't anticipate. And again, I think it has to do a lot with the freedom I was afforded in the mentorship that I had. It was, yeah, it was exceptional. I think it's really rare in academia, to be honest, to be given that kind of latitude. I think it has something to do with our discipline as well. The way in which our discipline is formed by interdisciplinary dialogue, I think has a lot to do with the fact that the people in it are open to understanding movement writ large. That said, I appreciate your comment, because I've certainly come across that 1,000 times, but as someone who's always been swimming upstream, I guess I just sort of went right over my head. I just thought, ignore that. But yeah, I think that's a valid comment, and it's something that we continue to have to fight for, to kind of establish margins that are appropriate at any given time, historically, they're contextualized margins. The other obstacles I would say, and these are obstacles I realized mostly in hindsight. I've never been a person who understands half measures. So, I think I have learned over time and after a few more difficult experiences later, not during my after that, how to scale my work appropriately, how to establish what we call a work-life balance. I don't even know if that word truly, like that concept really exists in some ways because of the way our lives are configured and the neoliberal paradigm that we exist in, but nonetheless, that idea didn't exist in me prior to that. And I think I've learned that there's something, I'm going to say this, ask you in a way, I've always wondered if dancers are more like oriented to perfectionism than other.
I do way more work than I should have, and when you were saying that, I was like, can you tell me how you figured that out? Yeah. But because, yeah, like, I'll talk about it when I talk about the art stuff, but I have that issue with a little bit, some of the projects I do, for sure.
Yeah. Well, in my assumption, and I think I remember Penelope Reed-Duke mentioning this at one point in a creativity course about how dancers, because of the early training and the arduousness of the training, the physicality of the training, requires so much discipline that then it just becomes part of your nature. And that's a wonderful thing. It's something we can carry into any field, and it's remarkable. But on the other hand, it's difficult to understand how else to be and how to soften those edges, right? And I think partially through a lot of different practices like yoga and meditation and things that I actively sought out to try and soften because I needed to. Other parts of my life were becoming difficult to manage, to be honest. And that's what made me realize that something needed to change. And I'm glad for that too.
So I always find I have a tangent, but it's valid. It's linked to my process here. So in terms of my actual experience doing the dissertation, I would say, yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my topic. I enjoyed engaging with the faculty, especially those on my committee who were with me during that dissertational process. One challenge I did face was because of the nature of what I was doing, my scholarship, my work was based on classical Indian dance. What I was doing within that was I was trying to write this narrative of one sublineage that had not been really written about very much or discussed very much. It was there, everybody knew it was there, but we never heard this very much, at least back then, pre-2014. When I went outside of during my time here, whenever I would go to conferences, other scholarly conferences, dance conferences, academic conferences, humanities conferences, wherever I would present the work, there would always be an emphasis on, and I would get this in questions at the end of all the panels, the questions that would sort of push me in the direction of deconstructing. And I think this probably at that time, at that moment in time, historical moment in academia, deconstruction, post-colonial deconstruction of a narrative was very, it was very heavy in academia. But my project was to create a narrative, to construct. I cannot deconstruct when there is not a construct. And I felt myself in the midst of that tension, because here I was trying to sort of write a narrative for something that had not really received attention, but there was this external pressure, this academic pressure, not from my immediate professors, but from the outside academic world, to sort of be in alignment with the deconstruction project, which a little bit was present in my work, but that wasn't my project, and that was never the focus of my work. So I found there to be a little bit of tension between my work, what I was trying to do, and what was expected. So that was one of the challenges that I faced. Now, this may have been just at that moment in academia. That was, I guess, every few years, there's a certain direction that academia takes on the overall. This may have just been that historical moment where deconstruction, problematizing narratives, those were the bigger key, I guess, streams that academia, especially within humanities, within arts, was invested in a lot. But again, that was never quite my project. How did I navigate that? I actually was pretty honest about it. I was like, that's not my project. I could address that, but that really is not my project. So I kind of stayed focused on what I wanted to do anyway. Other little challenges, small challenges, I guess everybody probably faced a little bit of this, but the form, I don't remember its name, but it came back to me 3 times, the research using human.
The ethics form.
Thank you, that was me.
6 months. Because
So I had a grant application due for which I needed that. Back then, there used to be a, actually, it wasn't so much a grant, it was like a fellowship, a Shastri Indo-Canadian fellowship, which had, and I think they may not have this program anymore, but it had 2 streams. It had the scholarly stream, and then it had the fine arts stream, which was open to independent artists. And my form, that ethics form, bounced back 3 times for extremely strange things, like, why is my email on the form? Why is my phone number on the form? So it kept coming back, and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to make this deadline. So I gave up on applying for the fellowship one, for the scholarly fellowship one, and instead I applied through the fine arts field, same fellowship, fine arts field. All I had to do was submit back then a DVD of my work, not deal with ethics at all. So I went in as an artistic practitioner instead. I still got all my answers, or most of my answers. I guess, strategized differently around that. But I do remember that was a big source of tension at that time. But otherwise I enjoyed my time at York. I enjoyed meeting, and the alumni network, I think, has been incredibly valuable. It's been incredibly valuable. Just discussions we would have in class, or sometimes even outside of class, they were just incredibly helpful. I mean, I think certain times discussions and what we hear in conversations can unlock thoughts and can unlock curiosities or new ways of thinking. And that's really what I got from being in this environment. But yeah, I guess like certain problems, which I'm sure were universal, that ethics forum was one of them. But that's generally, those were the ones.
Right. So our last round of questions is about your current artistic practice and how your scholarly work engages and intersects with your current artistic practice, and how those two feed off of each other. Should we start in the middle? Priya, does that work?
Sure. My artistic practice is really diverse and always has been. I think it manifests as it always has now, as it did when I was doing my PhD at York. It's but I have to just repeat what I've said before, which is I think dance has allowed for that to exist. I have not been required to be a monolithic human being, for which I'm incredibly grateful. I think there's something about our current culture, the neoliberal paradigm again, if you will, that likes to streamline people into categories. And I think there's something about that that's essentially antithetical to the artistic process, at least for me. And so that freedom to be creative in multiple ways and to engage movement as a theme across different disciplines has been incredibly useful. Like, for instance, to look at film as something that engages movement has been something that's been really increasingly of interest to me. And now I'm actually in a department of the dramatic arts, so largely working with performance studies and theater, and not necessarily where I imagined I would necessarily land. But the skills I have with regard to movement have been invaluable, and they continue to inform the way in which I teach. I especially notice it as I'm teaching, actually. I'm teaching kids, Gen Z kids, who want to be actors. And this is fascinating to me because I think I'm able to connect with a side of them that still loves to move. I know that sounds a little bit unusual maybe, but there's something about adults, if you will, that we stop moving. There's something more sedentary about us. And kids are not necessarily at that point where they've fully transitioned into that. And there's a kind of vibrant movement about them. And I think I continually tap into that with experiential work that I do in a classroom, even if it's not necessarily theater-based. Often I use movement-based work actually with them to explore the things that they're interested in. So that's what I would say.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the projects that you're working on? Favorite one at the moment?
Well, the Rhinestone Cowboys one. Every day it changes. And I guess in terms of, it's occupying so many different streams of thought in my mind now. To be honest, it's hard to collect it into one place, and I find myself waking up in the middle of the night, having thoughts about it and writing notes, and then going back and thinking, no, that's for the book, and this is for the embodied project. So I think, as Jonathan mentioned, I appreciate being able to have developed the skill to envision projects as having different formats, to engage with things in different ways. I think this is something actually explored quite explicitly in Selma's course on memory, which is trying to engage theoretical concepts in ways that are deeply embodied. And at different times in my life, that's made more sense than others, but right now it's becoming, at least for the Rhinestone Cowboys project, very much a way in which I'm exploring my own identity, but also the idea of like the construction of the Wild West and its myth of historical creatures that still inhabit our world. So this idea of the cowboy and the other, and the ways in which they move are things that I can explore both in terms of embodied practice, but also in terms of like whether it's theoretical work or whether it's ficto-critical work. So then, bridging the two sort of forms with fiction is also something I'm really interested in. The slippery nature of fact and fiction and how that overlaps with the way in which history is retold is something that interests me. And I think actually, as it turns out, dance and theater are wonderful ways to explore that in ways that are not dead. There's something about the written word is dead, it's fossilized as soon as you say it, it's done. So there's something lovely about that. I think that's why performance is always appealed. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yeah. So my dance pieces that I've always made, one of the things I've used is like lists. I always make like lots and lots of lists, and I've always made like phrases with lists, and I never quite understood this, and I never quite thought about it. I just did it. And when I was doing those media studies classes and communication studies and philosophy classes here, I read a bunch of interesting books. One of them was Manual to Landa's Assemblage Theory. Another one was Roki Azuma's Otaku, Japan's Database Animals. And these are like books about ideas about kind of scale and about kind of putting things together in different ways, and the way that a lot of, I guess, artifacts of postmodernity have this kind of structure that kind of works against the idea of kind of a grand narrative, these kind of ideas, and which is interesting because I don't really I love watching a dance piece with a grand narrative, but I don't like making it. This is not that exciting. So one of the things that I got to understand because of my dissertation was what I was interested in artistically, and then being able to really focus this and start being able to use it for the purpose of not just grant writing, but for myself, and making works that had this structure. So the piece that I made, the pieces that I made for my dissertation were looking at the zoo, but I wanted to not be like, oh, look at the animal. I didn't want this. I wanted a little bit of that. That's super fun. But I also wanted to look at the structure of like the way the zoo compartmentalizes things. Right. So the phrases, the dances, one was about the Toronto Zoo, the other one was about the Berlin Zoo. They had like 355 phrases. The other one had 500 phrases, and I made them with a good friend of mine and long-term collaborator, Danielle Baskerville. And I liked these things when I made them. They took like years. They took a long time, and especially, you know, Priya just mentioned neoliberal economy. This is not, we don't do this anymore. People now make a piece in like 3 weeks and then it's done and then performed and then it's gone. So I took the time to really do this. And here's where we get to that whole thing about perfectionism and doing too much. So after I finished, I was like, let's start doing this. And I made a piece about the Spadina Gardens, the way that they set up their garden. And then I had a thing with the Merrill Library where I was looking at their sci-fi collection and all the descriptions of alien bodies and trying to make something with this. And I often lately have been moving from like looking at maps and looking at like collections of things. I did another one at the Berlin Natural History Museum. I looked at their fossil collection. The last thing that I made that was finished, I looked at 300 different clips of women's gestures in world cinema. So it's like five-second clips of women from all over the world over the last 100 years. And this was, I think this one was successful too. And so the new thing that I'm working on is based on, I think it's, it might be 250, but it could be 300 clips of animation. So a lot of times animators like work from real bodies and they use dancers' bodies to create things, especially with motion capture. And I thought, what happens if we go the opposite direction and the dancers are like using animation to create phrases? So I don't always write about the dances that I make, but I always do research as part of the process of making the dances. So I'd say that, yeah, they're very linked. If you know, some I will, like if I can get a publication out of a dance, I'm like, sure, let's try it. But I'm not gonna make a dance in order to get a publication or do writing. If it comes out of the process, then for sure, I'm interested in doing, I want to share my ideas.
Thank you. Yeah. Firstly, it's so fascinating to hear about your journeys. I mean, I'm kind of lost in both your stories now with the Rhinestone Cowboys and the zoo, the creativity that I guess you both see in that and how you work that. In terms of my current artistic work, right now, like I'll describe a little bit about one of my projects I'm working on right now. I'm working with a choreographer via Zoom, legacy of the pandemic via Zoom. I'm working with not just me, a few other dancers from Ensemble Topaz as well. We're working with a choreographer from Tajikistan. He is Ostad Mirzo Sattarov. He is the choreographer of the Zibo Ensemble, which is one of the folklore ensembles of Tajikistan. And we're working with him to create dances based on his memories of pre-1980 tours to Afghanistan. That was a time when Afghanistan would have a lot of cultural exchanges with Tajikistan, and he was a very young man at the time. He was with his teacher who was at that time the artistic director of the Zibo Ensemble. And this entire group would go into Afghanistan and perform dances there. And there was a lot of cultural exchange. And so I'm working with him to, again, source movement material for dance, Afghan dance. And also there is a lot of cultural overlap. One, Afghanistan is multilingual. Dari, one of the languages, is common to both countries, Tajikistan and Afghanistan. So there are a lot of songs that both countries have. There's a lot of, I guess, just a lot of overlap. So I'm working with him and again, really looking at the idea of memory as this site, as this repository of, I guess, creative movement material. And this was something that was, as a methodology, was part of my dissertation here. And again, yes, subject was so different. That was classical Indian dance. And yet there was a lot of memory involved because, or looking into memory, at that time I was doing a lot of participant observation, a lot of interviews, and I'm still doing a lot of interviews. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of the methodologies I'm using. One difference is right now I am focused more on the actual dance and not so much theorizing it with other theories from humanities and social sciences, mostly because my output is in the form of a dance as opposed to a scholarly written paper. So that, I mean, yes, I am still using a lot that I worked with during the process of the dissertation, and it was a very rich process. I'm very, like, I feel like it's not just our dissertation, it's every step of the journey. It's everyone whom we've TA'd for. I feel like they have fed into that journey. They have unlocked something. Even every class that I've taken, I remember I was in Professor Danielle Robinson's, I believe it was one of the ethnography courses that she had. And she said something very interesting that unlocked a whole method for me. And that was, when you look at an academic paper or a journal article, trace the choreography of the writing. And that was a really interesting process for me, because the very next year after that, I was at the Center for Academic Writing as one of the writing instructors there. And I would tell whoever the students were that came into that center, coming in with how do I write an essay? And I'm like, okay, find me your favorite journal article, trace the choreography of the writing. And I could see their eyes open too. So I feel like every little step of the journey unlocked a process. It was, yes, my dissertation was my focus, but there was so much more. It was a journey, and the dissertation was probably the major work that came out of that journey at that point in time. But really it's been the long lasting effect has been more the long lasting takeaway, I should say, has been more of the journey, every encounter I've had in the process of the journey. And it is a small department, but it is so rich in every way. So that's been my takeaway.
Excellent. Thank you very much. At this time, we can open it up for questions. I'm going to rely on Norma Sue to feed us questions as they come in through the chat, but perhaps if there's a comment or something that's sparked a thought that you'd like to share with us from our physical audience, perhaps we'd like to start there.
I'm going to stop the recording at this point.
Very